yesterday. All my troubles seem so far away. Now it looks as though they're here to stay. Oh, I believe in yesterday. Suddenly, I'm not half the man I used to be. There's a shadow hanging over me.
Alright, so welcome to our conversation about explosions. We'll start out by talking about the case of Timothy McVeigh. This was a tragic event that in 1995, the federal building, Alpha P. Mira Federal Building in Oklahoma City, was destroyed with the detonation of a truck that Timothy McVeigh had parked in front of the building containing ammonium nitrate fertilizer, which he purchased legally, rented the truck, and then parked it there, detonated it, and tragically 70 people died, including 19 children, many of which were in the daycare in the building. The FBI created a criminal profile, and ironically, Timothy McVeigh was actually pulled over by a policeman for expired license plate. He was then found to be carrying a firearm that he wasn't licensed for, and then eventually linked to the crime. So, looking at what explosions are, they are similar to fire in that it involves an oxidation reaction, which is the loss of an electron from one reagent, which goes on to another reagent. Or they can be a decomposition reaction, which is where you have a compound that breaks up into its constituent parts. So, understanding a little bit about gas, kinetic molecular theory explains the behavior of gases. And so they are rapidly moving, they have a high energy about them, they're going to fill the space of an empty container because of that kinetic energy that they have. And there is no force of attraction between the gas particles or between the particles of the walls of the container. So think through these principles. I think if you visualize them, then it will make sense to you, and I'd like for you to pause your video now. Okay, we'll move on to the combined gas law, which is an equation that brings together the relationship between volume, temperature, and pressure. And so let's take a look at a couple of examples. In these two systems, this one is at 22 degrees C, this one 300 degrees C. So if the temperature of the enclosed gas increases and the volume is held constant, then that's when the pressure increases. So there's more kinetic energy about these molecules which are at a higher temperature. Okay, if the volume of the enclosed gas increases, so it goes from, this piston has moved it from here up, so the volume has increased, and the temperature remains constant, then the pressure decreases. Makes sense. So there are some characteristics of an explosion that involve waves, a disturbance in matter that carries energy. So a longitudinal wave is a pressure wave that has compressions here and then rarefactions here. So low explosives are defined as a material that burn rapidly but explode only when confined in a container. So one example of this would be a firearm, and this type of low explosion is used to propel a bullet. So this involves rapid, intense burning, and this type of low explosive is often used as a propellant. So the deflagration is the resulting combustion reaction that happens when these rapidly burning materials are held in a constant pressure. Okay, high explosives are those materials that do not need to be held at a constant pressure for that explosion to happen. So detonate easily, produce very intense pressure waves, and shock waves move faster than the speed of sound. Detonation is the initiation of that explosion. So primary high explosive, two types of high explosives. Primary high explosives, extremely sensitive to heat, pressure, movement, very volatile, and therefore not very useful in industrial or other types of applications. And that involves nitroglycerin. Secondary high explosives, a little less sensitive, therefore military and commercial purposes can be used. This involves TNT dynamite. Fireworks are a type of explosive, and the basis of the anatomy of a firework is that it's got the primer, which the wick or igniter is going to ignite here when it reaches the primer, which is then going to cause the black powder to ignite. And then the stars are the interesting parts here that give the fireworks its color, and that can consist of different ions. For example, if you took a chemistry class and you did the lab with the flame test, when you dipped your inoculating lube perhaps in calcium or strontium, then you can get these kind of green and red colors that the fire will burn. So in order to collect the evidence from an explosion, soil samples are interesting, debris from inside the crater that is created, any traces of the explosive residue, detonating devices, and anything else that seems relevant is to be collected. So a stereo microscope, otherwise known as a dissection microscope, which is low power, can be of interest to be able to examine the debris. You see the powder that can be evaluated here, and the different shapes that those powders may be confined in can affect burn rate within the casing. There are also color spot tests to be able to conduct some chemical tests to figure out the substance that it's in. Here are some of those tests and the colors that they'll turn. And then chromatography has kept coming up throughout the year. Thin layer chromatography allows for both qualitative, descriptive data of the spreading out of those chemicals, as well as quantitative data in measuring the RF value, which is the ratio of how far the solvent traveled versus the constituent components as it has moved up that thin layer. And then here's an example of a graph that you might get from the chromatography in analyzing the constituent parts of what you're dealing with. And then confirmatory tests to be able to see, okay, what kind of bonds, what kind of chemical bonds exist within this substance. So infrared spectroscopy, gas chromatography, and mass spec can be used to these ends. So in examining physical evidence, this would be things that are found perhaps at the scene, on any victims, or perhaps perpetrator if they're involved as well, pieces of wire, pipe, detonation devices, fingerprints even, residue on clothes, timing devices. Of course, terrorism is a specific avenue within the use of explosions, intentional use of force and violence to coerce or intimidate governments or other organized groups. And this can be for political, environmental, or religious reasons. Okay, so I'll say thanks for joining in. Hope you learned something about explosives. And take a look at the chapter summary.
Oh, yesterday came suddenly. Why she had to go, I don't know. She wouldn't say. I said something wrong. Now I long for yesterday. Yesterday, love was such an easy game.